Alright, time to do something a little bit more old school. This is from the Great War in the East, Tannenberg. This came out in an S&T magazine. It's actually one of the first war games I picked up in that initial set. And I see the copyright date on it, 78. And I think a couple of them are that. That leads me to believe that I've kind of cheated in terms of where I started with wargaming. It couldn't have been earlier than this, and it probably was in 79. And that actually fits in better with some other thoughts. It's just somehow I've gotten into my head that 77 was the year. But 77, I was playing a lot of long ball. Anyway. You know, we always kind of, I don't know, place things a little further ahead. So that puts me at maybe 12 when I picked this up. Maybe 11. Anyway. This was too much for me at that age. It was at least a year or two before I got up to speed with this. And this is the fifth wheel of the Great War in the East quad. One of the reasons I haven't covered it yet is maybe I've been kind of hoping to be able to pick up a copy of the quad cheaply. But, you know, honestly, I saw one at Consim World a couple of years ago, or not this year, but last year before, and for 50 bucks. And I kind of said, I'm not officially here yet. I'm not going to be here till Saturday. I'll leave it there. Well, I was gone by then. And 50 bucks without shipping cost was reasonable. I'm not sure how much I'm willing to pay. If any more than that, I'll keep my eye out, see if I get a copy. But, you know, it's an operational game, and I'm not huge on that. Okay. Let's get into what we have here and try to look at it a little bit. First of all, I played this not too long ago with my wife. But I've, of course, forgotten the rules. Well, it wasn't that recently. I don't know how deep into the Lace Wars stuff I was at that point, but I had started, but I don't know how far into the rules I'd gotten, so this could be a few months old. Anyway, I've pretty much forgotten the rules in that time, and I'm afraid that this introduction is going to suffer from that, but I'm not really in the mood to read the rules again, and then read them again, working through it. So we'll work through this here. First of all, we got our kind of basic NATO type symbols here. Individual unit designation, and then it's higher organizational. Regular unit sizes here. It's got a setup hex. And then it's got three numbers along the bottom that are kind of important. The attack strength, the defense strength, and the movement allowance. And then for headquarters, we have something a little different. We have an attack shift value, which is going to be an odds shift. A command strength, how many units it can put under command control, and a command radius, designation, who it is. Setup hex again. This is what's interesting about this game is it actually has two scenarios in it. One is Tannenberg, which is what I'm going to be playing, and the next one is this Winter Battle, Second Masurian Lakes. I have not. I don't know if I've ever played that one, and if I'm having enough fun with Tannenberg, I may throw that one up as well and play it. And then for the, we have a parenthesized combat strength, which means it can't attack, and a movement allowance there. Pretty standard. This is one of the first games I saw, not one of the first games with, but one of the first games I saw that had... It's one of the first games I saw. But yeah, this is one of the first games I saw that had step reduction in it. And my ex-wife made a nice little sequence of play thing. We used to work in a parking lot together. And so we have a lot of stuff on these where we put the sequence of play and then a little cheat sheet for her to indicate the different stacking points for different items. And you can see different size units have stacking points, and there will be stacking limitations here. Well, let me go over the basic rules, and then we'll go to the exclusive package to try to handle what's special about Tannenberg itself. Okay, so to begin with, in the sequence of play, you're going to have an initial supply determination phase where the phasing player decides which units are in supply, and whatever's in supply, well, it works normally. Whatever's not is going to have its movement allowance halved. Any reinforcements, and we've got some placed along the track here, come in play, and they'll come in on the turn listed. And we can scoop in on the counters. They've got kind of a helpful little, as well as the lettered location where it comes in. So, for example, A will come in over here, and those swing all the way around to H here. Okay. Then we determine command control, and you have to have units within range of a headquarters. Now remember, the range is what? The third number on the headquarters, the command radius. And you can only put a certain number of stacking points equal to the command strength in control. If units are not in command control, well, first of all, you get to roll a die for those units to see if they manage to be in command control anyway for the movement phase. And this brings into concept something that this system uses, which is a tactical quality value. Tactical quality is based on what army you are. And in this game, the Russians have a tactical quality of 3, at least for Tannenberg, and the Germans have a tactical quality of 1. If you roll higher than your tactical quality number, you succeed in this case. So the Germans are better than the Russians. And you'll see there's a number of effects to this tactical quality as we go through the system. Okay. Now, what are the effects of command control? Well, we'll touch on that a little later because I don't really remember that, but we have some little counters to mark when units are out of command control over there. Then we go to the normal movement segment, and movement is very much similar to a lot of operational games. Zones of control are a little bit looser in this game than they are in a lot of games, but where you can actually move through them at a penalty in movement points. And then you make an attrition check, which is if you were out of supply and if you're out of supply at this point, after you've moved, you have to make a check to see whether or not you suffer attrition with those stacks. All right, then we go to a cav withdrawal before combat. The player whose turn it isn't has an opportunity to roll a die with cav units and see if they can pull out. And I believe this is, again, related to the tactical quality. If you roll higher than your tactical quality, you can retreat before combat. This is especially important for the Germans because they're strategically or tactically, their position here is generally a defensive one in this battle. The Russians are trying to cut East Prussia, the troops in East Prussia off and surround that army. And, well, historically, it kind of didn't work out too well. One Russian army was surrounded itself, and the other one didn't do terribly well. One of the Russian generals goes off in the woods after the battle. Samsonov shoots himself. The other one, Rennkampf, I believe is his name. Rennkampf. Yeah, I'm so good with history here, right? The Arde ends up being tried for treason because he's German, and I believe he was actually condemned. Okay, and sacked. Maybe I don't know if he was killed or not. Unfortunately, these games that I bought for my first purchase, along with a lot of later purchases of S&T games, didn't come with the magazine. And the magazine has this tremendous historical basis on it. And I end up knowing more about the history, and it sinks in better because I read those magazines a lot more than, say, I read my World War I history, where I was more interested in the broad political strokes than anything else, as usual. Okay, then we go to the combat phase, which is going to have 2 segments. First, there's a command control segment. Both sides have to determine if their forces are in... No, I'm sorry. The phasing player only has to worry about putting his forces in command control. If he's not in command control at this point, it reduces the strength of his forces. And being out of supply is also checked at this point, and if you're out of supply, you suffer additional penalties in combat. And then you're going to be rolling on what looks like a somewhat weird combat results table. First of all, it's divided by tactical quality of the attacker. Then you've got a normal odds ratio here, and what look like little step losses, but they're not really. We'll get to them when we get to combat. But essentially what they do is they generate options which you get to pick off the combat results option table. And they're not really step losses. Okay. And then the second player, then there's a step replacement phase. At some point in the game, the players start getting replacement steps which they can push to their units. And finally then the second player gets to go. Complete mirror of the first player's turn. The Russians will be the first player in this scenario, and finally there's a game turn record interface. No biggie there. Nothing really to take care of. Okay. Anything exciting about movement here? Yeah, there's zones of control. So you're allowed to move from an enemy zone of control to a friendly zone of control, or I'm sorry, from an enemy zone of control to another enemy zone of control. You're also allowed to use railroad movement. And no matter what, you have a 1 hex minimum movement allowance, even if, as long as you're not crossing these prohibited terrains here. And we have a number of terrains. There's a terrain effects chart. Your normal sort of stuff there. Okay. You can move through friendly units without regard to stacking. However, at the end of any segment, you have to worry about your stacking limitations, and bad things happen if you fail that. Okay. During movement, you're allowed to entrain troops. You'll have a stacking limitation in terms of stacking points of how many rails how many units can take the rail. So, for example, the Russians have one that's tracked across the turn marker, whereas the Germans, I believe, have a fixed amount for the game. I think it's like 6 stacking points, but we'll see when we hit the exclusive rules. Then once you're entrained, you're allowed to move along rail tracks. Tactical quality plays into this. So if you have tactical quality 1, you can entrain even if you're in a zone of control. Otherwise, you cannot. And this reminds me a little bit of the Der Weltkrieg idea, where Germans and Brits can get on the trains even if they're in an enemy zone of control. The Russians cannot. Okay. So, what do we got here? Let's brace my arm a little bit. Yeah, not like anybody really watches when I'm talking like this, but video is the only way to do things. I can't create sound files in any way that I know of. Once you're entrained, you don't have a zone of control. If you're out of command, you can still engage in rail movement, but you cannot detrain, entrain, or use normal movement while you're out of command control there, if you're entrained. There's these off-map links. Let's see if we can see one of them, which allow you to extend rail lines. You'll also see there's 2 different kinds of rail lines, and that's of some importance in the exclusive rules. There's these dashed ones and these drawn ones. If we look at the terrain effects chart, just kicking around somewhere. Oh, here it is. You'll see something important, which is that maybe you won't, which is that the rails actually don't affect your movement. So you can't walk along the rails as though they're roads or anything. They're just for rail movement. Let's see. All right, stacking is again recorded by this, and the stacking points is specified in the exclusive rules. We got a bunch of different things listed here that fit into the whole thing. So, for example, when German units move by rail, they can go 30 hexes. When Russian units move by rail, they can go 18. The Germans always have 8 stacking points per game turn that they can take on rail. You can only use railroads in your own country. There's no extension of the railroads as you capture territory. The game is not of that scale. Stacking is 9-point limitation throughout, in all the hexes. You'll see Russian core are 4 points each, so essentially they could only get 2 core, which is sort of their big units in one hex, but then they could also add one of their smaller units. Headquarters don't count against stacking. Divisions are only 2, and most, I think German big units are divisions. Now, they're not as big, not just numerically, but strength-wise in this game as the Russian core. You'll see the Russian core here, 484. That's a pretty big unit. Let's look at a German division. 345. So it's a little better on attack, though, the German divisions. And 2 divisions is about the same size as a corps. We also have these fortress markers, which have their own defensive strength, and there's a reduced strength portion to them. So they also will take step losses, just like units. And there's little counters to handle that a fort's been reduced to half strength. Wow, that didn't zoom quite as well as I liked. And then one to indicate the fort's been destroyed entirely. For the stacking, for the units themselves, somebody fell. 102. Okay, for the units themselves, they have different numbers of stacking points, essentially, of step losses. So these guys only take 1 step loss and they're destroyed. But larger units, let's see if a German division have a second side over here. And the Russian corps take these little markers that reduce their strength by a point by putting them on top. And then once they're at half strength, you can flip this over to reduce. So they have 4 steps to them. I think the German divisions only have 2 steps. Only Russian corps have 4 steps. Okay, for supply range for the Russians, it's going to be 3 hexes to a railroad, and then the railroad has to go back essentially off the map. For the Germans, the supply range is going to be equal to the unit's movement allowance, which means they have a little bit more flexibility in terms of getting supply. But on the Russian side, they get these little depots which will work to extend your supply net, because you can only use your friendly rails, and the Russians are attacking. So what they can do is move one of those 3 hexes in from a rail line in Russia and then extend 3 more hexes in. And they can actually chain those so that they can keep their supply going really all the way into Germany. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to capture anything. And they are attacking. If you're in excess of the stacking, you are eliminated, or your opponent says, hey, come on, fix that. Whatever works, because there are mistakes and that happens. Zones of control, like I said, they're going to cost you an extra movement point to enter a zone of control. They're very fluid here. All units have zones of control. Well, that's not entirely true. 0 strength point units don't, and headquarters, I believe, don't. We may have some additional changes there. Well, we'll see. You have to pay an additional movement point to enter an enemy-controlled hex, and you can go directly from enemy-controlled hex to another, but you just have to keep paying that extra movement point each time you go. So you can kind of infiltrate a situation like this in a way that often in operational games you cannot. Headquarter units and supply depots don't exert a zone of control, even though all units do. This is all in the basic rules, but these things don't tend to be terribly well trimmed the way, say, an OCS game would. Okay, so for combat, combat is at the phasing player's discretion. They can choose to declare an attack however they like. And they total their attack strengths, which is, remember, the first number on these counters. And the defending hex totals its defender strength. The attacker need not attack with everything that's next to something because it is at their discretion. You get an odds value, and then you will roll based on your tactical quality and see what the results are. And these are expressed, I believe, in terms of losses for the attacker and losses for the defender on the right. And as the odds get better, you can see, well, gee, I've got a chance of eliminating the defender entirely. Odds are rounded in favor of the defender. Okay, let us talk a little about how, divisions have 2 steps, as do some brigades. Corps have 4 steps. Let's talk a little bit about the combat results table here, or the options. So, each player gets a 1 or a 2 in their losses, perhaps. A 3 for the defender, or possibly an E. Okay. The simplest is the E. The defender's eliminated. Cool. But let's look at some of the other options. Let's continue looking at the defender. So on a 1, they can either lose half their total steps of the units in the hex, or they can retreat 1 hex with the stack. On a 2, all their units are eliminated. And there is a reference here to 8.75. That's the you shall not pass. The attacker can't advance if the defender takes that option. The defender can choose to take half-step losses and retreat 1 hex, or they can choose to retreat 2 hexes. You're seeing something here. The defender doesn't have to take losses. That's kind of interesting. And then on the 3 option, the defender can choose to be eliminated, again, refusing an advance, or lose half their steps, and each unit is retreated 2 hexes. Now, for the attacker, it's a little different. The attacker on a 1 has to lose half their steps. This doesn't matter. Let's see. Okay. No, not half their stacks. Not half their steps. It's half the steps present in the smaller force. That could be the attacker here. It could also be the defender, in which case the attacker, wouldn't take half their own steps necessarily. And on a 2 result, the attacker must lose steps equal to the total number of affected steps. Notice there's no retreat option for the attacker. They are committed to hitting as hard as they can. All right. Now, let's see what we've got here. Number of rules kind of governing retreat. It's got to be kind of locally towards the rear, stuff like that. Tactical quality comes into play here. Units with a tactical quality of 1 can retreat through enemy zones of control, but units without that cannot. So they start having trouble they can be surrounded in a way that's easier than the Germans can. The Russians are easier to destroy that way. If retreated units end up in a hex that's going to be attacked later in the turn, they don't add their defense strength. They don't count towards the size for losses, but they do take all bad effects. Okay, when the defender retreats, the attacker can advance into that hex. In fact, if the hex is vacated, the attacker can advance into that hex. But there's one exception to that, which is if the defender on a 1 or a 2 result decides to eliminate himself. No, I'm sorry, on a 2 or 3 result decides to take an elimination, then the attacker cannot advance. He's been blocked. But if the defender retreats, or if he gets an E result, the attacker is allowed to advance into that hex. Okay, what about supply? I've already kind of told you how supply is determined, but the effects of it is the movement allowance and attack strength are both going to be halved. It's not going to affect rail movement. If you're out of supply during attrition phase, you roll a die. On a 1 through 3, you lose half your remaining steps out of the unit. Attacking, and that'll be rounded up, so you can die that way. Attacking units that are out of supply during combat must also check for attrition immediately before the odds are computed. So there's a chance you'll be halved in steps, and then your strength will be halved as well. Right? Yeah. Okay. Headquarters are immune from attrition, however. Okay, what about command control? So I've already talked about that you can put a certain number of units under command control, but there's other effects to command control, to the headquarters units here. First of all, they have the attack shift. Let's look at one here. That's here, it would be the 2. That's how many columns an attack can be bonused by. They also have the command strength and radius, which is number of steps that you can put under control and how many hexes away you can be to put things under control. Finally, they have a defensive strength, which is normally pretty minor, although there are leaders like this guy who do not have a parenthesized strength, and they have an H to say they're heroic leaders. They're going to be so effective right at the front that they have a significant effect on the combat. Okay. First of all, all headquarters are able to aid an attack by giving it an attack shift, just a single attack in their command radius. They can give it a number of shifts equal to their attack shift, and that has to be chosen for one attack, and it'll just give you column shifts in your favor. Those units are going to have to some extent, be under your command, and we'll see what those limitations are, I suppose, later. Heroic leaders can use their combat strength, which is not parenthesized, for both attack and defense. However, there are limitations to that as well. There has to be troops there. They aren't just, gods of combat. They're just very good at rallying and causing their troops to have greater elan in battle. Okay, and headquarters also put units under command control. The attack shift can't be used in defense. You can only receive one command shift in an attack per command level. Now this is important, mainly I think for the Germans, who have multiple levels of command. They have these lesser leaders who are corps leaders, and then they have an army leader who's got this stripe. They can get command shifts from both a corps leader who's applicable as well as their army leader. You need at least 2 stacking points to add the command strength of to add the combat strength of a heroic leader, and they have to be stacked with the leader. They have to use any attack shift they use in conjunction with any heroic ability they have. Now, for command control, you look around the radius. So this guy's got a radius of 1 hex, and he can command 7 stacking points. That's not a lot. It's a corps, okay? It's a little better than 2 divisions. Well, actually, it's a little better than 3 divisions if you look at this, because 3 divisions would add up to 6. But it allows them to create kind of an ad hoc little set there. And if you put a unit within command control, it doesn't get one of these OCC markers during movement. If it does get one of those, it has a chance of evading it. As we said, you get a die roll based on your tactical quality. The radius cannot be traced through enemy occupied hexes, but it can go through zones of control. It can't go through prohibited terrain. I'm sorry, it can only go through enemy zones of control if the tactical competence is 1. Otherwise, zones can cut you off from command control as well, and yes, that's right. And supply works the same way. Okay. and that's going to affect your ability to move. If you're moving out of command control, let me see. I believe your movement allowance is halved. If you're attacking when you're out of command control, and you get to reassign your command control at the moment of an attack, so you probably shouldn't do this if you don't have that. Your attack strength will be a quarter normal, right? No, it'll be half normal. And that could be halved and halved again for being out of supply, which comes to the quarter. There's no die roll to re-enter command control for attack purposes. If you have a tactical competence of 3 or 4 and you're out of command control, and you're the defender, it adds 1 to the result of the combat. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, no. No, it adds 1 to the result. If you're the attacker or the defender, you take 1 extra result number if your units are out of command control. And that would make a 3 jump up to an E. In general, the attacker's not going to be facing this, but yes, it adds to his too. Okay. This. Yeah, I see how this is happening. Let's push the board a little bit out. All right. So if your headquarters get stepped on, you get to displace. You're not destroyed. If right, unless you're surrounded, and only the Germans, only the tactical quality 1 can displace through a zone of control. If If a headquarters is eliminated and it's an army scale headquarters, it's possible, like this guy, to have a reduced strength side that you'd... Well, this doesn't focus as well as my other one did. Getting a headquarters eliminated, though, is pretty tough, especially for the Germans. All right, what about these fortresses? They defend with their printed defense strength, which will be, for example, this has a 6 to begin with until it's reduced. They're affected by combat results just like other units, except they must absorb all the step losses first because they're not allowed to retreat. They have 4 steps. We have that weakened side. We have a -1 as well. Once fortresses take damage, they can't be replaced. They don't count against stacking limits, and they're always in supply, along with up to 1 unit in the fortress's hex. Cav withdrawal before combat, that's going to be 2 hexes if you make your successful roll. Cavalry suck in combat. Remember, this is World War I. They already sucked back in the American Civil War. They're pretty ineffective here. They can't use their attack strength unless they're only attacking cav, depot, or headquarters. Otherwise, they're reduced to a quarter of their strength, rounding fractions down, which generally means they're able to be ignored. Although I guess a pile of them could have a strength point. At some point in the game, divisions and corps that have lost steps can be restored towards strength. You're allowed to roll a die for a certain number of these. And if you didn't move and you successfully make the die roll, which will be in the exclusive rules, you upgrade to full strength. You can't do this with cav, fortresses, or depots. Reinforcements come on the board. Great. And we have a terrain effects chart here. We have it duplicated over there, but it indicates the different types of terrain and the movement point costs, which are based again on your tactical competency. The Germans have an easier time doing everything. All right. Let us look now at the exclusive rules and what's special here. when the Russian player wants to entrain units, he has to roll a die, and he needs to get a 3 through 6. Otherwise, he burns his rail capacity and ends up not in training and not being allowed to move with those units. There's a special rail movement limitation, which is how many stacking points you can move through a hex based on the type of rail. There's single track and double track. The single track is the dashed lines over here, while the double is the solid lines. Now, as you can see, the Russians can only move 1 corps on a single track rail, whereas the Germans have a little bit more capacity. This is a pain in the butt, but there aren't a lot of counters in this game, so it's quite possible to remember where you've moved and not make a lot of mistakes that way. Okay, special rules because of Rennenkampf, and yes, that's his name, and Samsonov, I think. Yeah, Samsonov. There we go. Hey, I've got him right here. I didn't look, but I remembered him just at the moment when I could see them. Amazing how that works somehow. I don't know. Anyway, the Russians are limited to their commands, where Rennenkampf is going to be commanding the first army and Samsonov is going to be commanding the second army. But worse than that, the units of the headquarters themselves cannot be within 12 hexes of each other. However, on game turn 10 and after, you can count hexes in Germany as two hexes each. So the headquarters can operate a little closer to each other once they've invaded, but they can't combine to make a stronger punch through. They have to kind of do this outflanking type attack. The Russian headquarters also cannot use their attack shift unless over half the attacking force is the same army as the headquarters unit. And all the Russians have is army headquarters. The Russian units are automatically in command control during game turn 1. Okay. Some more special command things. This is the von Hoffman unit. You can see it's a particularly useless looking leader with 0 on all values, but he's not. If he's stacked with a headquarters, he doubles its command radius, and he adds 50% to the command strength, the number of units that can be commanded by it. This is very powerful. So if you look at the army here, if he stacks with the army commander, he increases its range to 8 and adds 16 units, so it's able to command 16 stacking points, so it's able to command 48 points of units. That's quite powerful. If German corps, if a corps headquarters wants to use its attack capability, at least one of the units has to belong to the same corps, and that's kind of tricky. So let's see what we got here. So this guy's the 1, and he's marked as VF1. This guy's VB1R. His unit is marked 1R. That's going to be kind of tough to keep track of. I'm sure I'll screw that up. There's an optional scenario that allows you to disregard the Russian command limits. Hidden movement. The Germans have these little Gruppe markers. I haven't set them up that way yet because setup is fixed at the beginning of the game, although there is a free setup scenario which makes them even more interesting. But the Germans get to keep their units under those and kind of use them as a blind system. The Russians have no such advantage in this game. Now, the Russians are able to detect these in a number of ways. One of them is if they're next to them, they reveal them. But another is if they can't trace supply, they can ask if they actually can trace supply. If there's nothing that's blocking their supply path, that has to be noted, and in fact, where the hole is noted. The Germans also have these variable reinforcements here, and they comprise of Hindenburg and his 8th Army or something. Well, no, these are just a couple of corps that get shifted over into the 8th Army because this guy von Pritzwitz here is the commander of the 8th Army before Hindenburg arrives. Now, You have certain modifications here. Russian victory points, headquarters within the German borders, if von Pritzwitz has been damaged, or if Hindenburg's already on the board, there's a minus to the die roll. And essentially, this die roll allows the Germans to get these reinforcements. That sounds good, right? If the Germans are doing poorly, they get a lot more troops. Well, yeah, except Russians get victory points for causing the Germans to have to bring Hindenburg off the West Front. The German has the option to just commit all of these at any time during the game. It is possible that just von Pritzwitz will be replaced. You'll see the 7 or 8 result causes that. And that creates the -3 bonus, which can keep the Germans from having to pull those troops onto board. The Russians also have a garrison requirement here, which is they have to keep at least 2 divisions in Warsaw and 1 division in Kovno and Grodno. I'm running kind of low on graphics here, or on battery. Okay, Warsaw's back here, where Kovno is up here. I didn't force this on my wife. I'm just realizing we didn't do that. And Grodno's where? Up here. Yeah. Okay. And any restriction if that doesn't happen. This is removed for an individual hex if a German unit of any type comes within 4 hexes, and for all 3 if it's turn 10 or later and there's less than 25 victory points for the Russians. Okay, victory points are in part for controlling towns, and those will have little parenthesized values. You'll see those can get quite high in some places. They have to have occupied it and be able to trace supply to it. And the Russians will get those victory points for each turn that they're sitting there at the end of the game turn. So it's not just controlling the area, just controlling it per turn is kind of nice. So you can build up some points, or you can make a kind of brutal stab to grab something and get a lot of points at the end. The Russians can't get any victory points on turn 1. There are also some victory points that come from other reasons. So destroying fortresses gives victory points, and those are the German fortresses by where they are. Destroying steps on enemy units. Russian stacking points west of the XX19 and north of the 14XX hex row at the end of turn 6. So XX19 is going to be this kind of... So we got to be north of that and... No, sorry, west of XX19. West will be this way. So west of that and north of the 14XX. 14 is here. So what we're talking about, 14 north is this way. So what we're talking about is kind of this little corner up here. If I can get any stacking points in there, those are going to be worth a point each. Bringing the Hindenburg headquarters into play costs 20 victory, gives the Russians 20. 45 if the reinforcements come in. So, the historical situation, the Russians caused 65 victory points to change hands. Even though their army got destroyed, they got a lot of points off that in game terms. And then each German headquarters is worth 20 if you destroy it, or cost it a step. Remember, a step is really a destruction. It's just got the ability to come back. But they lose 4 for each Russian step lost. They lose 5 for any Russian fortresses that are destroyed. Now that's a pretty extreme thing. The Russians are on the aggressive here, and for the Germans to destroy fortresses that the Russians hold, that's really saying the Russians are doing poorly. Each Russian headquarters is worth 14 for being destroyed or losing a step. And then here's the biggie. Each game turn, starting on game turn 3, in which there's no supplied Russians in Germany north of the 20x hex row. Okay, that is this line here. Really the border of Germany, for the most part. During the game turn interface. Now, I seem to remember that was 2 hexes in or something like that. For each turn starting on... No, that's right. So yeah, so the Russians have to push some troops into Germany. And the north of the 20XX just means, well, you can't count this little piece of Germany down here. That's really what it comes down to. So you need a serious incursion, an incursion into Germany, into the East Prussia area that the game is mainly played on. And then the victory conditions for the Russians require that they get at least 33 points to get even a marginal victory out of the net. Now, I don't have a ×1 here, which I must have lost, but I have a -100 here, which is an indication to me that this has usually ended up to be a very, very bad situation for the Russians. And certainly when I played with my wife, it did not go well for the Russians. And every time I can remember, the Russians have done very, very poorly. They have everything going against them: the tactical quality, the German more flexible movement, the interior lines the Germans have, the conflict in command the Russians have, the hidden units, just things going for the Germans. It's really tough to push them here. And actually the historical result may be hard to achieve. It may be that that actually shows a pretty good Russian player. All right, I'm going to send this one up, and we'll give this a start sometime tomorrow. Maybe in the morning we'll start